Well, hello everybody, and welcome to this PBI webinar on protecting our future through corporate accountability. My name is Richard Hermer, and I'm a human rights lawyer based in London. And in a minute, I'm going to introduce our wonderful panelists. But before I do so, let me give you some technical information about how this webinar is going to work. Now, normally in a seminar, I would start off by telling you where to find the toilets and where to find the fire exits. But in this new world, my instructions are a little different. And there are a few things to know. Firstly, we're able to provide simultaneous translations of Spanish into English and English into Spanish. And hopefully at the bottom of your screen towards the right, you should have a button that enables you to pick your language. Technology has many downsides, but it is fantastic how it can bridge language barriers. Now, secondly, I'm going to make sure at around the 45-minute mark that we take your questions. And again, at the bottom of your screen, you should find a Q&A function. And please send in your questions as we go along. And then I'll be able to put them on your behalf to the panelists a little later on. Now, this seminar also has a very special and unique feature because, as well as our panelists, we are at the end going to hear from one of the great supporters of PBI, Frederick Mulder. And Frederick's going to talk not only about the centrality of individuals to human rights, but he's also going to host a raffle. And it's a pretty extraordinary raffle because Frederick has donated a Picasso linocut. So stay tuned and get ready for the information as to how to buy a raffle ticket. And in case you're watching this after the live broadcast, don't worry, the raffle's going to remain open. Frederick will explain all, and you too can take part. Now, there are two things I'd like to say by way of introduction to tonight's topic. The first is about the organisation that is hosting the webinar, Peace Brigades International. As many of you will know, it is a truly extraordinary human rights organisation. Now, there are many things I love about PBI, but perhaps the thing I admire most is they don't simply talk about human rights, they actually do things. Their work protecting human rights defenders and bringing their plight to international attention allows activists and lawyers a means of carrying out their vital campaigns and legal actions by reducing, albeit sadly not eliminating, but by reducing the various serious threats to their life and their limbs that they face. The work of PBI is at the very heart of the human rights movement. It pumps the oxygen of support to those who need it most. The second thing I want to say is about the theme of today's webinar, which is the struggle against corporations to ensure accountability for human rights abuses that they have caused or been complicit in. The activities of multinational corporations can have a profound impact on the lives of millions of people on this planet. And when their power is misused, it leads to gross violations of human rights. The examples take many forms: large-scale environmental damage, land grabs and the removal of indigenous populations, unscrupulous labour practices such as child labour and forced labour. And also, as we're going to be discussing shortly, complicity with state agents in the killing or mistreatment of activists. All of the panelists you're going to hear from in this webinar are involved in this struggle. And what we want to explore is how do we seek accountability and remedies for corporate abuses? And we're going to be discussing this with panelists who can give perspectives of community activists and campaigners and human rights lawyers. We have the benefit of an extraordinary group of panelists. Indeed, so engaged are they that two of them Danilo Rueda and Jani Silva have been held up in proceedings before the Inter-American Court and going to be joining us a little later. But I'm going to introduce all of our speakers, and then I'm going to start with those not held up in court. So one of those held up in court, Jani Silva, is a community leader from the Putumayo department of southern Colombia and is a legal representative of the Amazon Integral Sustainability Development Association. In 2000, peasant communities created a campesino reserve zone in Putumayo, and Jani works to defend this remote Amazon region against oil extraction. She's led the community struggle against the oil company's operations, denouncing human rights violations and breaches of humanitarian law. Danilo Rueda, who is also held up in court, is a human rights defender at the Interchurch Commission for Justice and Peace in Colombia. And he is also executive secretary of the Interchurch Justice and Peace Commission, which is a human rights organization working to expose violations committed in the conflict zones of Colombia by state security forces and paramilitary groups. And Danilo and his organization have defended human rights in Colombia for over 31 years. Jessica Joyas Morales is a human rights lawyer and a member of CAJA, which she will no doubt correct me on my pronunciation of in one moment. Jessica is a leading human rights lawyer who accompanies and represents communities and union organizations that have been victims of multinational companies. And she leads the campaigns against the corporate capture of state institutions. Now, before turning to introduce our fourth speaker, I just want to point out what may be obvious, it may not be obvious to all of us listening in Europe. Jani, Danilo, and Jessica face very real threats to their lives in carrying out the work that they do. I live in a jurisdiction in which human rights lawyers live very comfortable existences. We even get prizes or get made judges. But that is not the reality for our dear colleagues working in Colombia and in many other parts of the world. Now, none of that is meant to downplay the importance of our next panelist, Richard Meeran, because Richard is head of international law at LIDE and has been at the forefront of the fight to develop law to ensure accountability for corporate abuses. For, at the very least, the past 20 years, Richard has been litigating cases that have sought to ensure that multinational corporations based in London are held to account for the activities of their subsidiaries overseas. And Richard has been incredibly successful in his endeavours. He's obtained accountability and remedies for victims of human rights abuses at the hands of corporations in cases stemming from all over the world, be it South Africa, to Tanzania, to Peru, and beyond. So you will all immediately see that our four panelists are experts, activists, and lawyers. And Jessica, I'm going to start with you, if I may. And if you could, over 3, 4, 5 minutes, explain the work that you do and the priorities that you set for your work.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being here and listening to us. As you mentioned in your introduction, our collective of lawyers, CAJAR, is a human rights organization who's been working in Colombia for more than 40 years, accompanying victims of state crimes, but also communities, union organizations that somehow have been affected by companies, national companies, but mainly by international corporations. Our collective has been accompanied by PBI for many years now, and thanks to their help, we can carry out our work in more safety, in a context where each and every day we're persecuted, we're threatened, and where all the time they're listening to us and they are following us. They're following each and every of our activities. When we accompany communities and the follow-up that we do with multinationals and companies, we have seen something that we call patterns of abuse of power. And this comes by how the state and the corporations are together. So the corporations have taken over the state institutions. And one of the patterns that we've noticed in this abuse of power can be divided in 5 parts, and I will briefly say what they are. So, and I will explain later on how they work. So first of all, there is the regulation instrumentation. So they used the regulation for the benefit of corporations. Secondly, and this first point that I mentioned very briefly is more present now than ever before, because you have the state of exception, and COVID has been the excuse to have this state of exception. A second pattern that we have seen are how they justify themselves through this discourse that helps them to justify their abuse of power. So very often we can see this happening. Thirdly, we have also noticed that the omission of state action. So how they have protection and what communities are asking for, but many times the companies and the state are allies. And then fourthly, the physical force, how they are using, for instance, in Colombia, the police, the army, are these institutions that are created to protect the population, end up being allies of the corporations and the multinationals, and they end up attacking the communities asking for their rights, the communities that ask for these corporations to stop abusing their power. And the fifth pattern that we've seen is the fundamental rights and how these are not respected when we have companies and in all sectors, not only in mining or hydrofuels or the big agro industry, but also processed food companies and many others that end up not respecting the rights and affecting the population. And I hope that further on in our conversation we can go deeper in each of these patterns. Thank you.
Jessica, that's wonderful. Thank you very much for that. And also what is wonderful is that Hani and Danilo have made it out of their court hearing and are joining us. So I'm going to start, because I can see that Hani is just setting up. So I'm going to start with Danilo, if I may. Welcome. I wonder if you could also describe for us, Danilo, the work that you're doing and the priorities that you are setting. And Danilo, you're going to need to take, you're with us now.
Ya, ahora sí. Muy buenas tardes, muchas gracias por la posibilidad de participar en este espacio de PBI, nuestros colegas
this information together with our friends from CAJAR and from PBI. For 32 years, we've been working in our organization. The main focus of our work has been in 110 community processes for campesino, Afro-Colombian and indigenous communities. They're building peace in the regions, protecting the right to land, to the environment, and also building and facing from their work impunity, and also all the strategies carried out in Colombia against them. And they are coordinating new ways of participating, facing the situation in our country. We have legal aid, also psychological aid, and in the environmental sector, we also have specific work and communications. These are the separate areas of work that we have. And going back to what Jessica was saying in her presentation, we want to highlight how the illegal intelligent operations that have been found recently, and this is something that has been affecting us and Cajar as well. So the target of the illegal operations have been people such as Annie Silva, a social leader who's been carrying out work of environmental support in the Perla Amazonica Reserve. And we've supported her work. And this intelligence operation seems to go against her legitimate work to protect the environment in such an important region such as the Amazon. But they are also trying to punish the people who have been promoting peace, working towards peace, and also for the right of victims to justice, peace, and reparations. So in these 110 processes, we have seen a direct intervention against the Commission for Truth. And they have having dialogues and trying to find proof. And this has been very difficult in the last few years. We have had agents from the state who have shared information on how they have helped the extractive industry in their work, and how many military operations have been protecting the international investment and capital, going against the life of Colombians, which would be their constitutional duty to protect their lives. So going back to what Jessica was saying, we agree that the governance at a national level, regional level has been co-opted, and now they protect the interest of these companies. And they go against the rights of the campesino, indigenous, and Afro-Colombian communities. So at the international level and national level, there has to be a discussion and to know what we understand as a state, what would be a state of rights, not just a normal state, but looking at the environmental side of things as well. But for instance, the region of Hani Silva, we can also see the inference of criminal groups. And also, if they have financed these illegal groups or paramilitary groups, the company has to know that there are links with these mafias who are behind the attacks and the threats against Hani Silva. The companies have to be aware of the links between the company and the energy battalions that have been guaranteeing their investment. But what they do, on the other hand, this kind of activities against the life of Colombians and the national sovereignty. Thank you very much.
Danilo, thank you so much. And you've in part introduced the work that Hani is doing. So I turn Hani now to you. Welcome. And perhaps you could explain the work that you're doing in the campesino communities and the issues that you're facing. And you've just fallen into the very same trap I fell into. Yeah, with the mute button.
Hola, disculpen. Buenos días para todos, para
My name is
todas.
Hani Silva.
Muy alegre de estar
The
en este
work
espacio.
that we've been carrying
Pues
out for several years, for
repito,
many
mi nombre es
years,
Hani Silva.
since 2000,
El
with
trabajo
the
que nosotros
reservation was created,
realizamos
with the
desde
reserve
hace
was created.
varios
Sorry, what
años,
we
muchos años atrás, desde
wanted
el
to
2000
do
que fue
through this
creada la
is to
zona de reserva
reactivate
campesina, lo que
the
se
clean
pretende con la creación de la zona
campesino
de reserva
economy,
campesina es la
respecting
reactivación de la
our
economía
environment and
campesina,
our
agrícola,
soil in the
limpia,
Amazon. When in
diversificada y acorde a
2000 this
nuestro
area
suelo
was
amazónico, a
created,
nuestro
our
entorno
expectations in
amazónico.
the creation of
Cuando
this
en el 2000 se creó la zona de reserva
protected
campesina,
area,
dentro de nuestras
we
expectativas de la
never
creación de la zona de
envisaged
reserva
that we would
campesina
have
no
oil
estaba
companies
en
of big
no estaba en el panorama
monocrops
el
that
que
would be
tuviéramos
affecting
empresas
the
petroleras
Amazon
ni
soil. It's very
monocultivos que
fertile
pudieran
soil, but
afectar el
also
suelo
very
frágil de la
fragile.
Amazonía.
You can
Ese
grow
suelo
anything.
fértil,
It's been blessed.
pero a
We
la
could
vez
call
muy
it
frágil
blessed
que tenemos
because
nosotros, donde
whatever
se da de
you
todo,
put
donde
on the
podemos
ground,
decir que es un
any seed
suelo
you put on the
bendecido porque
ground will
todo
grow. So in
lo
our
que allí se
organization,
tira una
we have
semilla
done
ahí
everything
nace.
we can to defend
Es por
this
eso que nosotros desde la
ideology of
organización hemos
conservation,
hecho
of
todo lo posible por
and also
defender
respecting
esa
the
ideología
environment,
de la
producing and
conservación
respecting the
con un
environment at the same
respeto,
time.
o sea,
We are implementing
la
projects
producción
of
con un respeto hacia la conservación.
recovery of
En este
species and of
momento estamos
forest.
implementando proyectos
Some of the
de
species are
recuperación de bosques y de especies que
nearly
ya
extinct.
están
So
prácticamente en
we
vía de
have rules
extinción.
regarding
Tenemos,
fishing and
digamos, y creada por
hunting.
las mismas
And in our
comunidades unas vetas
communities where
del
we
tema
get
de la
together,
caza,
we have
del
said,
tema de la
no,
pesca,
we
creadas
must
desde
have
las mismas comunidades
a part
donde
set
nos
for
hemos reunido
production,
y se ha
but
dicho no,
another for
tenemos que tener
conservation. So
una parte para
when
producción, pero hay que dejar una parte para
all of a
conservación.
sudden we
Es
were
por eso
told,
que
we were
nos
asked if we
pareció cuando
could be in this
nos
Amazonia for
propusieron de
Peace
pronto hacer
project.
parte
We
de un
thought that was a
proyecto que se
great
llama
idea because it
Amazonía
was very
Sostenible para la
close
Paz.
to our
Nos pareció muy
ideas, and we've
bien ese
worked really
proyecto
nicely
y
with
va acorde
boys and
a las
girls
iniciativas que tenemos
to
nosotros.
look
Se
at
ha
the
empezado un
native
trabajo muy
bees
bonito
in
con
our
los
area.
niños y con las
And it's a
niñas
shame that
de la
I'm not able
recuperación
to show
las
you all
abejas
this
nativas,
amazing
las
project that we
melíconas.
have with
Qué
children in our
lástima que de
area.
aquí no les
Why
pueda
with
mostrar
children, with young
todas
people,
esas
with
cosas
women?
bonitas que se
Because
están haciendo con los
those
niños y con las
children
niñas. ¿Y por qué desde los niños y las niñas, los jóvenes, las
teach us
mujeres?
new things every
Porque
day.
esos
And I
niños
think that is
incluso
with
a veces nos
children
dan,
with whom we can build
a diario
something.
nos dan, digamos, enseñanzas
Adults,
nuevas. Y es
and
con los niños que se puede
respecting,
construir. Porque
with all
decimos
due
muchas veces
respect
que
to all friends, but
los adultos,
sometimes
con todo
those
respeto
like myself who are
también
older,
a los compañeros que a veces no les
w-
gusta,
it seems
los
that we
viejitos
want to
somos más
take advantage
resabiados. A
of
veces ya
everything,
tenemos
but we have
metido
to
el
tell
cuento de
children that
que
no,
todo
it's not
queremos
all
sacarle
about money,
provecho
it's not all
y la idea
about
es enseñar a esos niños
accessing a
que no todo puede
computer.
ser
There are many
dinero, que
other
no todo
fantastic
puede
things
ser
around us.
tener
And
un
we are working
acceso a un computador,
in
a
a
un
very
sino que
exciting
hay cosas muy
project
bonitas.
because these children
Lo que estamos
every
trabajando
day
nosotros
they
es
learn from
emocionante
bees, from
porque estos
butterflies,
niños día a
from
día lo que
everything
aprenden
around us.
digamos, de esas
The
abejitas, de
excitement
esas
that they
mariposas,
feel
de lo que
and
tenemos,
this learning, and then
ellos, la
when
emoción que reflejan
the
y
parents who say, my children
ese
are
enseñar
teaching
y
me that
ese
we
que le
have
digan
to
los
grow
padres de familia,
something because
cómo le
then
parece que los
we
niños le
will
están
help bees
enseñando
as well. So
que hay
all
que
this
sembrar
work
harto
that we
porque
do
las
every
abejas
day
son las que fecundan las
is
semillas y
really
todo eso. Entonces, ese
fantastic
trabajo que
and
estamos haciendo
exciting, but it's
nosotros nos
also
llena
challenging. The
un tema
challenge to
de, digamos,
defend
de
what we're
emoción,
doing, because we
pero
cannot
a la vez nos
allow
pone como unos retos y es a defender lo que estamos haciendo,
we cannot,
porque no podemos
how
permitir
could I say this?
que las, digamos,
The when we look at the
¿cómo lo dijera?
projection of oil companies, these go completely against us, and we don't have to let them interfere with our life project. All these wish to preserve and to have to do a little bit in order to have less impact, less global warming and everything, finding these seeds, having a healthy life. When we find certain living conditions, it doesn't mean that we can go and buy 1 to 2 kilos of rice, but to know that what we're giving our family is healthy. It has no chemicals and it won't lead to any disease. So this is the work that we've been carrying out.
Annie, that sounds fantastic. And
ese es el trabajo que nosotros, digamos, estamos haciendo.
Annie, that sounds fantastic. And I should say, as a parent of 2 children in 4 months of lockdown in London, the idea of them focusing on birds and bees rather than screens sounds fantastic. I'm going to turn, if I may, to Richard Meeran. And Richard, for you to just outline in a few minutes the nature of the work that you do and the priorities that you set. And then I'm going to ask some questions.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm very pleased to be invited today. First of all, I just want to say how much admiration I have for our Colombian colleagues. As Richard said at the beginning, you work in an environment where your safety is at risk, whereas we have the luxury here in London and in Europe of not facing those kinds of challenges. So it's quite a different picture. The other thing I want to say, Richard, is I've been doing these cases for 26 years, not 20 years. And my recollection is that Honey and I are exactly the same age. So just to kind of to outline the cases that we've been doing, we've been doing cases for a long time now in which we have sought to hold multinational parent companies to account legally in their home courts. So for our cases, that's in the UK. And that's because we are pretty clear that in general, access to justice has fewer hurdles in the home courts than it does in the courts of the host states, in the local courts. The purpose of the cases is to provide redress for victims and to deter future misconduct on the part of multinationals by hitting them where it hurts, financially in their pockets, and also by affecting their reputation where they've behaved badly. I think it's fair to say that the cases that we've been involved in have changed the law and the legal landscape significantly, as well as providing justice for many thousands of victims. At the same time, I want to recognize that the cases that we bring, which are compensation claims, are quite a blunt instrument. They're only feasible in a few cases, and monetary compensation for individuals is not always the priority, especially for indigenous communities, and in some instances that kind of approach could be divisive. So I think that's the qualification to what I would say. I thought I'd just share some features of some key features of 3 of the cases that we have done where the claimants have been in Latin America, and that's over the past decade. The first case, which is a case that you were involved in, Richard, was a case for 31 Peruvian environmental protesters who sued a company called Monterrico Metals. And this was a UK mining company that decided it wanted to make a fast buck by digging up a pristine area of land in which an indigenous community lived. The government was on its side. Deaths and injuries and torture of environmental protesters was carried out by the Peruvian police, assisted directly by the company employees and with the encouragement of the company. And no action was taken against the police or the company. Trumped up charges were laid against the victims, suggesting that they were members of Shining Path. And so it was a case where the claimants would have faced significant challenges had they tried to pursue a claim in Peru. That case was settled a few months before trial. The second case was a case against a company called Extrata, formerly part of Glencore, and it arose from the operations of the Tintaya mine in Espinar in Peru. Similar case to Monterrico, again, deaths and injuries caused to environmental protesters by the Peruvian police. Following the protest, again, victims harassed with trumped up charges, and we then brought a legal case. These complicity cases, cases where you're trying to hold companies to account for human rights abuses which are perpetrated by state security forces, are very difficult legally and factually. They depend on evidence from company employees who understandably are fearful of the consequences if they provide assistance. And they're also dependent on obtaining access to internal company documents, which are not always easy to extract. In this case, it was quite interesting that we had several court hearings where we were trying to force the company to produce its internal documents. And we were quite successful in achieving that. There was one document, for instance, that was produced where it was clear that the company had been in the habit of referring to the local protesters as hormigas, in other words, ants. So there were references to hormigas en acción, which means ants in action. So that was the kind of derogatory language that the company was using internally in relation to the protesters, and one can only imagine then how that attitude translated into the actual conduct of the company. Now, unfortunately, that case was struck out in 2017 following a limitation trial. The third case to mention is a case that's just started up this year. It's a case that Hani and Danilo know very well. They have been involved in the case in detail, and we've been working with them on that case. It's a case for 270 Colombian campesinos living in Putumayo, which is near the Ecuadorian border in a remote area. And the claimants in that case alleged that the oil extraction operations of Amerisur Resources have polluted streams, rivers and wetlands, causing adverse impacts on the water, making it undrinkable, reducing the number and size of fish, causing skin irritations, and also affecting crop production. Now, those are the allegations. The company denies those allegations. There's also a specific allegation about the company's failure to prevent and clean up a large spill of oil from tankers, which was sabotaged by a third party. As I say, all the allegations are denied. A feature of this case, which was also a feature of the Monterrico case that I mentioned, was that we discovered at the beginning of the case that the company was about to be sold to a Colombian company. So it's an English company about to be sold to a Colombian company called Geopark. And the concern was that if that happened, then Amerisur, which is the English company that against which the legal action was going to be taken, would be wound up and left as a shell, and that it would have then been pointless taking legal action against it, because one would have ended up with a judgment which couldn't be enforced against any assets. And therefore what we did, as in the Monterrico case, is to to start the case with an application for a freezing injunction, an injunction to require the company to retain assets in the UK, which then could be used to satisfy any judgment if the case was ultimately successful. And the judge in that case has ordered Amerisor to retain £4.4 million in a UK bank account. So that's just a case which has started very recently and is ongoing, and it's got a long way to go. Thanks.
Richard, thanks so much for that. What I'd like to explore with all of you, and I'm going to be quite strict about how long you've got to answer these questions because time is running out and we've already got some great questions coming through from participants. But the one thing I'd like to explore with you is, what do you find the most effective means of addressing the human rights abuses caused by corporations? Do you find that it's community activism? Do you find that it's engagement? Do you find that it's legal action? And if it is legal action, does it make a difference if it's in the domestic context or the international context? Is there anything to be added by that international context? Now, I'm sure each case may be different, but just your kind of general observations as to what you find effective for trying to secure some form of accountability from corporations. And Jessica, I'm gonna start with you, if I may.
No sé si la pregunta sea para mí o para cualquiera.
I'm not sure if the
well,
I'm
gonna ask you both to answer it. So it doesn't really matter, but I put it to Jessica. So
puedo pedir a cualquiera vaya a responder a Jessica primero. Jessica, si me escucha.
Okay.
Y después Hani iba a preguntar que responda después. Entonces, Jessica primero.
Bueno, es una muy buena pregunta. Yo creo que no
So
tenemos toda la respuesta completa, pero definitivamente una manera eficaz para que respondan las empresas es, por una parte, es importante el tema legal. Había una pregunta por ahí del público que hablaba sobre los principios de responsabilidad en Naciones Unidas. Está probado que esos principios, mientras no sean vinculantes, pues no sirven.
So yeah, we need to have binding treaties because we know that whilst they're not binding, they do not have effect. So we need to have treaties around respecting human rights and businesses that are binding. And it's not just the communities who are defending their rights, but we need to really protect these communities who are defending their rights. So we need a real rule of law that exists within countries and a protection for communities that are defending their rights. And at the moment, the framework that exists is not effective. So in the end, what's happened a lot of the time in these sorts of cases, then companies sort of clean their name,
pues yo creo
like a sort of whitewashing.
Todo lo que se debe hacer es internacionalmente, de las organizaciones también de fuera que puedan apoyar, porque es decepcionante saber de que aquí no se mueve el gobierno o no se mueve nada si no es por intermedio de la empresa petrolera, y a nosotros nos ha pasado de que,
doesn't do anything unless it's through the oil company.
Las comunidades hacen un paro, hacen una movilización.
So with communities, they mobilize and they stop, they do blockages.
Y es la empresa la que llama al gobierno. Si no está la empresa ahí encima, el gobierno no llega. Nosotros sabemos que la empresa tiene un poder grande
if the company's not there, then the government doesn't get involved.
Ellos son los que están sacando la plata. y nosotros estamos
So it's the companies that are getting all of this money, and we are just being dragged through the mud by all of these decisions. We don't have our own government. We're just subject to whatever decisions the companies made, and we have to we're affected negatively by it. So the government isn't worried about the well-being of the communities, the environment, or anything. So they're just happy with like having this platform and the fuel getting that extracted from our communities. And all the communities that are affected just have to put up with it. So at the moment we haven't got responses to this, we don't have a solution. There are people who do not have water at the moment. And with the oil spill that we talked about, there's no environmental contingency plan to deal with these sorts of issues and problems. So the continued presence of a battalion who surround the oil companies, oil extraction platforms, but we're there on the border with Ecuador, basically invaded by paramilitary groups. And we don't get given any sorts of security, so the military protects the oil companies' platforms whilst we are left defenseless. So here what we need international involvement to pressure the Colombian government to make them respond to their human rights obligations and to make sure that we have our rights respected, and that is the way that it goes.
I'm going to ask Danilo about that. Danilo, again, in your experience,
yo creo
impact of international.
Yo creo que es muy importante la relación entre lo local, la comunidad misma, y el escenario internacional, los grupos de solidaridad. En el pasado logramos hacer una intervención frente a una empresa multinacional a través de un accionista y la compra de unos bonos de acciones para que se presentara una delicada situación que estaba sucediendo en una región del país. Y eso se debió a que las propias comunidades fundamentaron la situación, se realizó un intercambio con las organizaciones de solidaridad de ese país y se logró que la empresa se retirara de ese lugar. Entonces hay unos mecanismos que son extrajudiciales que pueden ser muy significativos para lograr afrontar o enfrentar mejor este poder corporativo.
I'm going to start off by unmuting. You would have thought after 4 months of Zoom calls 24 times a day, I'd learned that by now. I was just saying to myself, now to all of you, that I'm going to start feeding in some of the questions. We're getting really great questions. And Richard, I'm going to start off by addressing one to you. I mean, we've been looking, obviously, at this through the prism of Colombia. But Azad has raised a question about, you know, to what extent is what we're seeing in Colombia and your experience of litigating cases in the Americas, to what degree is that reflected in other parts of the world? Yeah.
Well, there are striking similarities, certainly, in many countries. The features that we've discussed of complicity between the state and corporations in resulting in the perpetration of human rights violations against impoverished people is unfortunately a common phenomenon. So too is the difficulty in which that victims have in obtaining access to justice locally for the kinds of reasons that we have discussed. And so, you know, where it is possible for people to get redress in the home state, then that is an option that is well worth considering. But obviously that only applies in a limited number of cases.
That takes me to a question that Richard Lord, who is also a practicing lawyer in London, who with a great interest in corporate accountability, has asked, and it's about the international standards, the kind of what lawyers would call soft law standards, the United Nations guiding principles, which lots of companies put on their website. They've signed up to. Lots of them proclaim that they live up to the ideals of the guiding principles and other principles of corporate social responsibility. Can I just ask, I think all four of you, do you think that those sort of principles, the United Nations principles and others, do you think that they have any positive impact, that they do force companies to engage with communities or raise their standards, or are they simply a means of just trying to pretend and they take the credit for signing up, but the reality is very different? Jessica, what's your experience?
It's a very good question. I don't think we've got all of the answers to this question, but
nuestra experiencia con los principios rectores de Naciones Unidas
to get companies to respond to these accusations and to take responsibility for them.
Apoyamos que realmente se cree por fin el tratado vinculante para las empresas desde Naciones Unidas.
So yeah, we need to have binding treaties, because we know that whilst they're not binding, they do not have effect. So we need to have treaties around respecting human rights and businesses that are binding. And it's not just
Nosotros tenemos
the communities who are defending
their
rights, but we need to really protect these communities who are defending their rights. So we need a real rule of law that exists within countries and a protection for communities that are defending their rights. And at the moment, the framework that exists is not effective. So in the end, what's happened a lot of the time in these sorts of cases, then companies sort of clean their name, like a sort of whitewashing. So I think
Entonces el tema de los principios, nosotros hemos hecho ejercicios con varias
there must be lots of international activities that can be done, because it's so upsetting to find that the government doesn't do anything unless it's through the oil company.
Have you had any better experience than Jessica? Have you seen companies signing up to these great international principles?
So with communities, they mobilize and they do blockages or whatever, but the company calls the government. And then if the company is not there, then the government doesn't get involved.
Con las comunidades, pero más que es una concertación, es casi
so it's the companies that are getting all of this money, and we are just being dragged through the mud by all of these decisions. We don't have our own government. We're just subject to whatever decisions the companies made, and we have to we're affected negatively by it. So the government isn't worried about the well-being of the communities, the environment, or anything. So they're just happy with having this platform and the fuel, getting that extracted from our communities, and all the communities that are affected just have to put up with it. So at the moment we haven't got responses to this, we don't have a solution. There are people who do not have water at the moment, and with the oil spill that we talked about, there's no environmental contingency plan to deal with these sorts of issues and problems. So the continued presence of a battalion who surround the oil companies, oil extraction platforms, but we're there on the border with Ecuador, basically invaded by paramilitary groups.
ir con esas mentiras y
and we don't get
digamos,
given any sorts of
firmarles
security. So the military
esas actas de
protects the
reuniones donde
oil
con eso
companies'
ellos
platforms
han
whilst we are left
legalizado todo lo que
defenseless.
tienen que presentar ante el
And
gobierno.
so here what we need.
Sorry, Danilo, I'm just going to, instead of asking
international involvement to pressure the Colombian government to make them respond to their human rights obligations and to make sure that we have our rights respected, and that is the way that it goes. So have our rights respected and protected.
But can we
Danilo,
use things such as the Global Compact or the general guiding principles? Can we as human rights activists use them in a positive way, or are they simply a means by which companies are blocking change because they think they can sign up to that and that absolves them of real obligations? What's your view?
Coincidiendo con lo que ha planteado Hani Silva y Jessica Hoyos, también hemos de decir que hemos podido lograr por lo menos algún tipo de interacción y de diálogo con
thanks to this principle, even if they're not binding. So this has allowed us to have an open discussion, and then obviously we have to agree on how we understand and how all this has to be applied. We obviously know that this means that if these principles were applied and complied with, the companies would have to modify many of their financial interests, and they would have to get to an agreement to build social and an environmental state, and also respecting the constitutions. But this has allowed us, nevertheless, to have this dialogue. And when we talk, when you talk about precaution, what do you mean? When you say you're not violating human rights, what do you mean? Because we mean this. Or when you say that you do not have a responsibility in this area, but everything around you is violence, displacement, threats. So how can you say that you're not aware, that you don't know that these things are happening? So this link that exists between investment and violence. So I think that it allows to open up these discussions, maybe not changes in practice, but at least these discussions. And there's a new initiative around zero tolerance that wants to recover some of the guiding principles, and at the same time pushing for a binding treaty, but having also an advocacy strategy with the private sector, so that at least we can sit down at the table and discuss these issues.
Thanks, Danilo. Richard, I'm going to ask you a similar, but again, slightly different question, and it's going to amalgamate a few of the additional questions that are coming through. And it's in two parts, really. Question, and it's going to amalgamate a few of the additional questions that are coming through, and it's in two parts, really. Firstly, I mean, to what extent in the cases that you bring are the kind of the soft law guiding principles, global compact, etc.? To what extent do they form a part of those cases? And secondly, the cases that you bring are mainly addressed to kind of compensation. Large corporations can generally afford to pay without too much bother. How effective is a compensation claim in trying to affect change in the behavior of corporations?
Yeah, on the first question, the relevance of soft law, I think we need to be a bit careful. The first point I'd make is that I agree with everyone that a binding treaty is what is necessary when it comes to the UNGPs. But of course, the UNGPs are, I think, a good stepping stone. They're moving in the right direction, and it's only one further jump to get to a binding treaty. Now, I think we need to be careful about when we talk about us using soft law and the UNGPs in our UK cases, that that is in the context of cases where English law has effectively applied, because the general position is that the law that applies to a case is the law of the place where the harm occurs. Now, it just so happens that a lot of our cases have involved claimants who live in places which have English law-based systems because they were former British colonies. That isn't the case with Latin America, where they have civil codes and which are generally based on Spanish civil code or the Italian civil code, and so on. They do often amount to the same thing, not surprisingly. They have remedies for the same thing, but whether the use of soft law, like the UNGPs or the Global Compact or the voluntary principles on security and human rights, would have the same import in those cases, I'm not quite sure. Now, to give you an example, going back to the Extrata case that I mentioned, I think we're arguing at some stage that the case might be subject to English law. And in the context of that, we argued that the duty of care that we alleged the company owed towards the protesters would be influenced by the voluntary principles on security and human rights, which the company had signed up to. And the court agreed with that. They said, well, they have to do more than just pay lip service to these principles. If they endorse these principles, then that must have a bearing on their duty. Now, I mean, it would be the position under English law. How that would translate into the laws of other countries that may apply in different cases, I'm not quite clear.
Doesn't matter how many times I do these, it's still the mute button every time. We've got 2 minutes to go, and before we hand over to the raffle and to Frederick's contribution. So what I'd quickly like to ask all four of you is whether or not the crisis that we're facing, this pandemic, has made a difference in terms of behavior of corporations, whether they think they can get away with things they couldn't before, whether they've got to behave better, and the impact on the people's lives that you're all representing, and whether this extraordinary time that we're living in has made a difference. And again, Jessica, perhaps I could start with you.
Me gustaría, gracias. Me gustaría comentar rápidamente.
Yes.
En esta
so I would
pandemia,
just like to
para
say
las
quickly,
empresas, lo que han hecho es aprovecharse de ese abuso de poder de la
the
norma.
companies during this
Aquí en
pandemic
Colombia,
have really
algo
made the
claro
most
es
of
que
this
con el estado de
time.
excepción,
So
la
here in
mayoría
Colombia,
de
it's been
decretos
very
que han
clear
salido en Colombia
that
han
in
sido
the
para
state of
favorecer
exception,
a las empresas.
the crimes
Y voy a
that have been
citar
committed
rápidamente
well,
algunos ejemplos.
the
Uno de
the
ellos es que
measures
los
that have been
empresarios
taken have
siempre han
favoured
querido y han
companies massively.
solicitado algo que
So one
nosotros
thing that's
hemos
happened
denominado
is
licencias express
companies
ambientales, que las licencias ambientales
has
sean
always
dadas de
been
manera muy
looked
ágil y muy
for
rápida.
these
Otro de los
environmental
pedidos ha sido la
permits
flexibilización laboral,
that they've been
afectando a
able
los
to get
trabajadores y a las
easier. There's been a
trabajadoras. Y eso se
flexibilization
vio
of
en esta
working.
pandemia. Se ha flexibilizado
And this is something that has
completamente
happened during the
las normas
pandemic.
laborales.
Work has been
Y al
flexibilized in
contrario,
the statutes, in
esa
morals.
cultura corporativa que les hablaba al inicio, pues se ha dado de una
And
manera
this
más relevante.
state capture
Hoy en
has
día son
happened
ellos los que
that I
todo
was
el
talking
día
about at
son
the
los
beginning. This has just been
representantes de los gremios
magnified.
de las empresas, los que todos los días
So
están
these
hablando
people
y creando la política pública.
representing
Pues
the
que
companies,
nos
and
está
they are
favoreciendo
guiding
esa
policy, public
Y
policy. These are
claramente
companies
esta
that are
pandemia
guiding
les ha
public
permitido
policy.
para algo que ha sido
So
muy
this
pues, indigno,
pandemic
y es el lavado de
has
manos.
served
En
for
La
something
Guajira,
that is
Cerrejón afectó el agua y
horrendous.
hoy
They've
aparecen
been
como los
washing
que
their,
llevan agua a las
cleaning up their
comunidades para
brands as if
salvarlos
they're
frente al
just
COVID.
new. And
Eh,
so, oh look,
las
we've been
empresas de
giving water to communities,
ultraprocesados,
aren't we
pues todo
wonderful?
el tiempo
they have used it to their benefit without changing their actions underneath. And they are using it to influence public policy, and you're not getting proper prior informed consent or giving out junk food to people as if they're supporting people.
Sin garantizar reales derechos a los trabajadores y a las
So yeah, they instead of protecting people, they have continued to act without protecting the rights of workers.
I'm going to ask you now, and then Danilo, and then Richard. But again, we're
muchas gracias,
almost at the end
Jessica.
of time. So your assessment from the community as to what impact this pandemic has had on the behaviour of the corporations.
Hola.
Hani, I can hear you. Correct.
Es que no me sale no me sale la traducción. Qué pena.
Hani, I'm gonna come back to you in one moment. I'm just going to ask Danilo then, and I'm going to come back to you in just 1 minute.
La pregunta es que no entendí la pregunta.
So Danilo, can I just ask you for your experiences with COVID and whether or not it's had an impact on the behavior of corporations? Well, right at the end, we're being faced with technological problems. I think we might have lost Danilo. So, Hani, can you hear me now?
No, sí, ya. Pues, ¿en qué ha afectado?
So how is it affected
la actividad petrolera, la actividad de la empresa ha seguido normal, como siempre se ha venido dando, y más sin embargo la actividad agrícola de los campesinos sí se ha visto limitada.
The campesinos have been limited in what they can do in their agricultural work.
Pongamos el derrame que hubo
So we're talking about the oil
aquí en el
spill.
sector, pues deja las comunidades afectadas.
So the affected communities have been limited because of the damage caused by that.
Lo del COVID pone como más vulnerable a las
COVID has exposed the communities and made them more vulnerable. There's also the fear about the whole situation, the fear of getting the disease
puede haber un contagio dentro de la parte rural
within the rural community. So there's been an heightened fear about contagion, and whilst the company has been continuing to work as normal.
Prestando apoyo a las empresas, se ve que hay beneficio para las empresas,
so there are
pero
benefits
no hay
for companies,
para
but there aren't any benefits for small-scale farmers, for example. There's no support for them.
Que donde aquí pongamos se dispare el número de contagiados en la pandemia, no hay forma de que al menos
the huge numbers of contagion, there's no support for people in Puerto Asís.
Respuesta a todos los contagiados que puedan surgir.
And so there isn't any way to actually properly respond to the number of people who are getting sick.
Unas camas o lo que sea.
There aren't enough beds.
Dentro de su accionar o de una forma económica hagan un aporte para toda esta, pues, todo lo que se pueda presentar con relación a la pandemia.
Yeah, and there's no contributions to support people in the case of a huge number of cases and needing the support.
Thank you, Hani. We have, I am afraid, run out of time for the panel discussion. I'm going to hand over to Frederick in just 20 seconds. Before I do so, can I thank you all for your questions? They've been fantastic, and apologies that I've only been able to touch on so few, but they're all absolutely to the point, and they've got about a week-long seminar you could make out of all of your questions. Can I thank all the panelists for not only your contributions, but for the extraordinary work that you all do. You've spoken eloquently about the downsides of this pandemic and how it's been taken advantage of corporations. But can I just say one advantage or one good thing that's come from a human rights perspective is that as human rights lawyers, we're starting to use this technology to bring ourselves together in a way that we wouldn't often do. And, you know, before we'd have to bring Danilo over to London to come and talk to everybody about what is going on. But now we're getting used to doing it in this way. And I've always thought that the smaller we can make this world for human rights activists, the better. And if it's one good thing that's come out of this, it's that we're learning to just as if we're in each other's living rooms, and it's great. Anyway, with that and with great and profound thanks, and I'm going to hand over to Frederick.
Thank you, Richard. Appreciate that. Can you hear me? Well, I'm very pleased to be part of this webinar. It's very inspiring listening to each of these speakers, and each of whom does such important work. And each of the speakers has highlighted the importance of corporate responsibility. And I'm not a specialist in any of these issues, but I'd like to highlight the other side of things, the importance of taking some personal responsibility for preserving the environment, as well as how I live my life, my personal life, in a way that keeps my emissions down. I'm an art dealer who uses a proportion of his profits to support the work of others who are experts in these issues and who deal with environmental and human rights causes. And I've, for a long time, felt driven to do this by the conviction that my generation, me included, is leaving the next generation and generations beyond a planet which is much less livable than the planet which my generation inherited. To hand the next generation a planet which will have more floods, more fires, more unbearable heat is in effect stealing from future generations, in my view. It's a theft that we have no right to make. So to me, protecting the environment is actually about protecting the rights of future generations. And given that future generations don't get a say in the decisions we make today, that seems to be the very least we can do for them. Of course, not everyone feels this way. Many people act, as all the panelists have pointed out so eloquently, many people act solely in their own interest. Not only that, but they deny the right of others who do wish to take care of future generations, indeed of the rights of this generation. So it's important not only to have defenders of the environment and defenders of human rights, we must also, because of those people who would seek to limit the rights of others, defend the defenders. And that's the core truth, that we must defend the defenders, that informs all of Peace Brigade International's work. It's defending the defenders. That's also why, as well as being a long-term financial supporter of PBI, I am today giving this wonderful organization an original Picasso linocut for a raffle which begins today, but will go on until the end of August. And I think a picture of the linocut is coming up now on your screen. The linocut's well documented in the literature, and the original block was cut by Picasso in 1957. You can see the date on the print. It was cut for the annual bullfight in the town of Valerice. Again, you'll see the name of that town at the bottom of the linocut on your screen. He lived in this town of Valerice, which is a town in the south of France, just behind Cannes, San Juan. So the bullfight was every year held in his honor. It was printed in a limited edition, and it came to me directly from the family of the printer, of the man who printed all of these prints, all of Picasso's linocuts, who I knew for 20 years before his death. And afterwards, his family sold me his personal archive and his personal collection. And I believe that Picasso himself would have approved of this gift. He did, after all, say, and I quote, "What I want is for universal hunger and universal thirst," and by that I take him to mean a hunger and thirst for social justice, "to be finally set free." Picasso also said that the meaning of life is to find your gift. The purpose of life is to give it away. The meaning of life is to find your gift, and the purpose of life is to give it away. So tonight I'm giving this Picasso away, and I hope it will contribute in some small way to the social justice and environmental protection which we continue to need so badly. The linocut's visible now, of course, and afterwards you'll be able to see it on the PBI website. It's worth just over £2,000, and you can buy a ticket for it for £25. And the great news is that another generous donor, a donor much more generous than me, will match with a charitable donation of £25 the cost of the first 400 raffle tickets. So he or she, I'm not sure who it is, will donate a total of £10,000 if we can sell before the end of August 400 raffle tickets, which I don't think is at all beyond our abilities. So your purchase of a ticket would generate two things: your chance to own a Picasso, which I would send to you, and I'd send the documentation, and a matching donation of £25, which would go directly to PBI. So think of your purchase of the ticket as one way of helping to ensure that PBI can do its important work. You'll be able to see how to, on the website, how to buy a raffle ticket. It's very simple, and I hope that many of you will do this. Thank you very much, and I now will hand back to Richard.
Frederick, thank you so much. Thank you for those words, and thank you for your great generosity. So go to the website, buy tickets, find family and friends to buy tickets, track people down in a socially distanced way to get them to buy tickets, and above all, support the fantastic work of PBI. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for supporting the work of PBI. Good afternoon, good morning, from wherever you are. Thank you.
Just until I think it's done now.